Welcome to another episode of the Lowdown podcast, the official podcast of the European Union of Jewish Students. Today, we are extremely honored to have a very, very high-level guest speaking to us. Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari is an expert on family law and international women's rights and the founding director of the Rackman Center for Advancement of the Status of Women at Bar-Ilan University Law Faculty in Israel, where she serves as a full professor. In December 2018, she completed 3 terms on the UN Committee on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, during which she also served twice as vice chair of the committee and as the first chair of the working group on inquiries. A graduate of Yale Law School, and in December 2024, she was selected as a recipient of an honorary degree from Brandeis University. She has published extensively in her areas of expertise, including a book on women in Israel that was published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. Professor Halperin-Kaddari, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you for having me.
I believe we all know, and our listeners know, that the past 14 months have been a new era for Jewish people across the globe, and not exactly a great era. We do represent a lot of young female activists, a lot of young female diplomats who try to fight anti-Semitism in their surroundings, in their Jewish student unions, on their campuses, and so on. And all those people observed over the past months, after one of the deadliest days for Jewish people, how our perspectives were simply denied, how our histories were denied, how our trauma was denied, in a world where the culture of always believing the victim is usually very important, except for when it is about the Jewish people. Could you tell us a little bit about your work in the past months, and also about the situation that you observe, especially for Jewish women across the globe, but also in Israel?
Yes, I very much sympathize with the way that you described these past 14 months. I think we can all say that for many of us, life has completely changed. And thank goodness, me personally, I'm thankful and grateful every day that it has not impacted me on the very, very personal level in terms of my immediate family and friends. However, in terms of my personal identity and professional identity and career and every day, it has really taken a U-turn. You mentioned my past experience on the international human rights and women's rights fronts and establishing the Rackman Center at Bar-Ilan University. But since October 7 of last year, I could say that I'm 24/7 doing the work related to the sexual violence and gender atrocities and the weaponization of women's bodies and of rape that Hamas committed on October 7 of last year, and the fight for the recognition that it had actually happened and what had happened, recognition by the international world, and justice for the victims of these atrocities. And this work is now done under a project which is under the Rackman Center. It's called the DINAH Project. We found ourselves 6 women all working in the same direction immediately after October 7. And we gradually formed into a team which is now doing this work both domestically and internationally. And I can tell you how it started. And I always go back to that full day when I was actually in Copenhagen, not in Israel. I was visiting my son who was studying there. And I was in the middle of a lecture tour between campuses in Europe and on the way to North America, a lecture tour on the judicial overhaul, the regime overhaul, which took place in Israel the preceding year. And unfortunately, regrettably is actually still very much going on in Israel right now.
Sure.
And it was Simchat Torah. We were on the way to go to the synagogue, and my son and daughter-in-law woke me up and said that a war has started. And that day, of course, nobody really understood what we were seeing on the screens. But the following day, when it struck me that Hamas had so many hours uninterrupted before the IDF actually started fighting back, and then remembering all the stories, the horrific stories that I heard from women from places in the world that I never thought that we would have this in common with them, women from Rwanda, Bosnia, Yazidi women. It dawned on me that there's no way that this would not be part of Hamas attack, of the massacre. And there were already some stories, surfacing on in the social networks. People started talking about that. And the first thing I did was to call my long-time friend and colleague from the years that we worked together on the CEDAW committee, on the UN Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, who is now actually in the most relevant position in the UN to deal with this. She's the Undersecretary General, Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Pramila Patten. And I called her and said, Pramila, we need you here. What do I need to do? What should I do now? And the first thing that she said, she asked me, do you know if it really happened? And for the first moment, I was taken aback. Like, is she doubting? But after looking back on that in retrospect, in reflection, I know that this is the exact question that should be asked, because that really put me in the correct position to understand what the task that we have at hand. We actually have to prove. We have to prove, and we cannot rely on rumors, and we cannot rely on just things that are, as I said, surfacing on the internet. And very, very soon there started to be also misinformation and disinformation from both directions. But on that day, I also understood that I'm in a very unique position with connections both on the international front, vis-a-vis the international organizations, the UN, knowing how the UN works, and having some status on that front, recognized international independent expert. It's very important to stress the independency, because when we are on human rights committees, we are there not as representatives of our countries, we're there as independent experts. So I'm not government. I'm academic and independent expert, civil society, but I also have these connections in Israel. As a demonstration, a week after that, I was actually invited by the U.S. mission to the UN to brief the Security Council on these issues. That actually, eventually it didn't happen, because China was then heading the Security Council, and they objected to that. So they refused to allow me to brief the Security Council. But this request also made the Israeli authorities realize that they should use people like me and like my other colleagues as those who can act on the international front and start fighting the denialism and the fake and disinformation that already was being pushed forward by Hamas and its allies. They started that immediately on October 7, even though they came in equipped with the GoPro cameras, and they made use of all the equipment to tape the atrocities that they committed. Immediately on that day, together with their allies, as far as we know, from Iran, from Russia, from China, they started deleting those informations that related specifically to the sexual violence, because they understood that this particular type of crime puts them in a different position and is going to refute their attempted mask and as freedom fighters and as
Yeah.
resistance fighters. If you're rapists, if you're just simple rapists, you can't be viewed as a resistance fighter. And that's, we understand along the way that this is really what takes the mask off their faces.
hmm Thank you so much for giving us all this incredibly interesting and important insights on your work and everything that happened after October 7th. And I think you mentioned two very important things or very interesting things also for us that also really mirror the experience of young Jewish women across the world. You mentioned the GoPros and the streaming of social media and your experience on October 7th itself. I think a lot of Jewish women, and especially young women, but not just young women, opened their social media accounts on the morning of October 7th all across the globe and knew that they are targeted as well, because this is what Hamas wanted to achieve, to make every Jewish person, and especially women, by using sexual violence, feel attacked and feel insecure. And let them know that, like, we are coming for you as well, no matter where you might be, and even if you're not in Israel. And I think that's an experience that has followed young Jewish women for 14 months. And then, like, regarding this, the difficult part is you mentioned how important it is to gather material to prove that it has happened. But even though 14 months later, we do have all this proof brought in by independent experts, brought in by different organizations, we still have so much of denialism about it on very different levels. We have it on university campuses, so it has become a daily reality for Jewish students. But we also have it in international institutions and organizations on very high level. And we have politicians, for example, in the European Parliament, who still deny the atrocities and legitimize Hamas's terror on October 7th. I know it's a big question, but looking into the future, how can we, as people who care, and as people who want the truth to be accepted, and who want recognition for all the victims of October 7th, be as young Jewish leaders, but on all kinds of levels, how can we fight this denialism?
It is a big question. A key component here is information and educate yourself. And this is actually very much part of what we set out to do at the DINAH Project. Maybe we can post, on this pod, we'll post the address of our website,
Amazing.
which we went online a couple of months ago, actually, for the annual of October 7. And this is, I think, the place which contains all the information available about the sexual violence and the conflict-related sexual violence on October 7. We put there the formal reports of those official entities that, as you rightly mentioned, already conducted fact-finding missions or investigations. First and foremost is the person that I mentioned, Pramila Patton, who came on a fact-finding mission with a team of 10 experts at late January, beginning of February of 2024. And she published her report in March, finding reasonable ground to believe that sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred in at least 3 different locations. And she talked about the pattern of bodies, mostly of women, which were found, and I'm not going to go into very grim details, but still, which were found partially or fully naked in positions that leave no doubt as to what occurred prior to their deaths. And she also mentioned the ongoing sexual violence against the hostages, which we know is still ongoing. Even now, as we speak, there are still 100 hostages held in Gaza in captivity. And then afterwards came the report of the Commission of Inquiry, which went even further than Patton's report, and they clearly attributed the sexual violence to Hamas. And they said that the instances, they were not separate, that they were done as part of a pattern. And that's really very important to know that this is a finding of an official UN entity, because denialism that takes place now is there are many who say, well, maybe there were some rapes, but they were not systematic, and maybe they were not even done by Hamas. They were done by the mob, and women always get raped in times of war. And I call this denialism phase 2. At first they denied everything, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Even October 7 did not happen. But now they're saying, okay, maybe there were some rapes, but this is not really the usage of sexual violence as a weapon of war. And what we are setting to prove is that there is abundance of evidence and of indications and of information gathered by those official committees and gathered by us based on information that we have access to from authorities in Israel, that points to the clear conclusion that the scope and the number of the attacks that occurred on that day that involved sexual violence, the spread, the high degree of cruelty and of mutilation, they all point to the conclusion that it was part of a pre-planned and preconceived pattern to use sexual violence as a weapon of war. And we will publish our own report and our analysis of the legal situation. I hope that we will publish it in the next month. And we will obviously also post it on that website. And the aim is for this to be used exactly in what you described, the ongoing battle for the truth and for the narrative, which is now continuing on social network and also on political levels. As you said, there still are also political leaders in Europe or in North America do still see Hamas as freedom fighters and justify their attack on October 7th.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and taking the time. We know that it's an incredibly busy time for you for, well, at least the past 14 months. We are extremely thankful for everything you've done, especially for Jewish women and beyond. And I hope that the next time we speak, the hostages will be home and the world will have recognized October 7th finally, and all this craziness around us will finally end and give us some peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for this interview and for doing the work that you are doing.
Thank you.